Hello and welcome to Sor Mind. I'm Dan Cosley, and in this episode we're going to look at Sor's Opus 44 number 6 study. We'll look at the harmony and some of the technique involved to help you understand tonal harmony on the guitar better, which in turn will help you play all kinds of music. So let's just dive right into this. This piece is in G major, and it starts in on a pickup in 3/4 on beat 3. And it just comes down a G major triad. Let's establish this as Do. So we're using the movable Do system here. So we sing Do, So, Mi, Do, Mi, Do, or root 5, 3, root 5, 3, root. And this A in measure 2, at the very end of measure 2, is a passing tone to the 3rd of G major in measure 3. Now, what's interesting here is the scale lines that he's using in this piece. Sometimes they might feel like they're just scale practice, like a straight line from a note to a note. But where these lead, where they fall rhythmically, and then where there's a deviation from the scale into a more elaborate, like arpeggio, neighbor tone, enclosure type line, where this happens is pretty interesting. So if we just look at the end of measure 2, going all the way to, let's say, the last note of measure 4, we have a G major scale that ends on E. So we play G, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La. And then the direction changes and it becomes an arpeggio again. Well, what is this arpeggio? Guess what? It's our friend, the half diminished chord. In this key, the 7 chord, the chord built on the 7th scale degree, is F sharp, A, C, E. And Sor comes down that arpeggio. Now we would expect that to resolve to the 1 chord, G major, and it does. Those are all tones of G major starting in measure 6. We have root 3, 5, root 3, 5. Then in measure 7, we can call this an A minor harmony if we like. For a moment here it's and then we have a single note D, which serves as the 5 of the key to the root. So if I review the harmony, I might say it's this. This is the 1 chord, the G major. Then we have a scale. And then G major. Sorry, at the end, pick up to bar 5, F sharp diminished, half diminished. You'll hear me saying half diminished in minor 7 flat 5. It's the same thing. I think jazz musicians prefer to think of minor 7 flat 5 because if you have minor 7 chords and you just lower the 5th, then you get this new category of harmony. If you call it half diminished, maybe you feel like it's a different bag altogether, Classical musicians will probably refer to it as a half diminished chord more often. So, well, I interrupted my own review of that passage, but let's look at the pickup to 5. We've got half diminished coming down, then the 1 chord, F sharp half diminished to G major, measure 7 feels like A minor. Then we have the single note D, which I'm saying feels like a dominant. Now, this is where things get pretty cool. It gets a little more dramatic. He opens this section, pick up to measure 9, on a B7 arpeggio. Take a listen. This is root, root, root 3, 5, root 5, flat 7, sorry. So root, root, 3, 5, root, flat 7. That's all B7. Dum, 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 ba, da, da. In measure 10, that's all E minor. So E minor is the what chord in G major? Well, G, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's an E minor chord is the 6th chord. It's what we call the relative minor. B7 is obviously outside of the key because we have a D sharp in measure 9. So B7 is the 5/7 of 6, another secondary dominant. We want to go to the relative minor, and we get there by way of a dominant chord built on the 3rd scale degree of the key, if that makes sense. B, G, A, B, normally would be B minor in the key because it has a D natural. But if we take that, we make it a D sharp, and we lower this root to the 7, we have B7 going to E minor. That's what's happening here. Pick up to measure 9, 5 of 6, B7, then the 6th chord, E minor. Then he comes down B7. Really, really beautiful. You'll notice that there are these stepwise connections. So bear with me here, lots of numbers. Measure 9, the last note in measure 9 is A. That is the flat 7 of the harmony B7. It resolves stepwise, scale-wise, to the 3rd of E minor. Here, the last note of measure 10 is the flat 3, G, the flat 3 of E minor. That resolves a half step down to the 5th of B7. And then he resolves in measure 12, he's resolving back to E minor, but he's using a 3rd, right? The root and then the 3rd, root of B7, resolving to G, the flat 3 of E minor. Listen to this passage one more time. E minor. Again, it's that half step or sometimes whole step, stepwise resolution of the harmony that just makes everything feel so smooth, and just like the narrative of the piece is just unfolding in an inevitable kind of way. There's no there's no jerkiness in Sor. It's all very eloquent, very well thought out kind of chess moves almost. So measure 12, we have a real sense of an E minor. It is, those 3 notes make an E minor triad. Now, you'll notice that in a lot of tonal music, whether it's jazz standards or Bach or this stuff, which is somewhere in between those 2 things, in the timeline of Western classical music or Western harmony, you'll notice a lot of resolution up a 4th. When I was in school, there's a lot of emphasis placed on learning the circle of fifths, and it's really useful, but no one told me, I learned it later, that it's really most useful viewed backwards, counterclockwise. So actually, most music doesn't resolve up fifths, it resolves up fourths. So case in point here, let's look at measure 9. We have B7, the harmony is B7, and it's going to E minor, up a fourth. It comes back, it repeats that, B7, then up a fourth again to E minor. Now, E minor up a fourth to A7 in bar 13, okay? And then it's going to go up a fourth to D, and it's going to go up a fourth to G, etc. Right? There's a lot of these passages where you're going up a fourth. And if I can, there's a little shameless plug here, but I built a website called Way of the Guitar, wayoftheguitar.com. And when I initially built that site, I wanted to teach tonal harmony on the guitar, things like triads and seventh chords and arpeggios and modes and things. And I took great care to organize the material often along the circle of fourths so that you're learning all of these arpeggios in that context, because that's what's going to happen in music. So by learning to exercise your knowledge through the circle of fourths, you'll feel like when you come to play pieces by really any composer, almost, you'll feel like you've seen it before. You've not only seen the B7 arpeggio, but you've seen its motion, its transition to E minor, or you've seen the E minor go to A7, etc. Okay, so measures 9 and 10, B7, E minor, 11 and 12, B7, E minor, different shapes through those two chords. The fifth of the E minor chord at the end of measure 12 connects us to the root of the A7 arpeggio in measure 13. A7, take a listen. Root, root, 3, 5, root, flat 7. Where does the flat 7 of a dominant chord go? It usually goes down a half step or a whole step to the third of the next chord. So in this case, it follows that logic. Measure 13 once more, A7. Resolving to the third of a first inversion D major chord. So we have A7 going to D major in measure 14. Now, this next thing we could call G major, but it kind of hinges. It could be G major or E minor. And those two notes, E and G, belong to E minor, but they also belong to A7 or C sharp diminished. You see, so how Sor is thinking exactly, we can't say for sure, but you might even call that our friend the half diminished seventh chord on C sharp. Take a listen in measure 15 if I do this. C sharp, E, G, B, minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished. So we're going in measure 14, D major in first inversion. And then let's call this C sharp half diminished. Where would you expect that to land? Well, guess what? It's the 7th chord in the key of D. So guess what? We've cadenced on the 5, D, right? So it's a kind of a 7 half diminished 7 of 5 in the key of G major. You might want to back that up and listen to that one again. Okay, so 15 C sharp half diminished, we'll say. If you like the sound. Then in measure 16, it's D. Now we get a scale walk again. Take a listen. Let's say that in that scale run, the end of measure 16, all the way to the beginning of measure 19, that is expressing D7. Because it starts on a D chord, or a D, the note D. We we've got a passing tone, the third passing tone, the fifth passing tone, the flat 7, and it comes back down 6, 5, passing note 3, passing note, root, flat 7, resolving to the third of G. And then Sor has a leap here. We have sort of an arpeggio. I want to call measure 19 a G major chord with a few non-chord tones. So mi, sol, fa, mi, re, do, fa, mi, re, do, mi, sol, mi, sol, mi, sol, fa, mi, re, do. But basically G. Mi, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Right? And why is it important to go through and have a conception for every note in the piece like this? Well, for one thing, engaging with it, in that active way does help with memory, but it also lends some substance and confidence to your interpretation, because these aren't just scales. We're not just going to play these the same, all the notes. We're going to play da, da, da. We have a subtle sense of those notes being, those non-chord tones being dissonances and introducing a little tension into the line. It's very much like bebop, actually. If you look at the end of 16, this is something you'd see in a jazz solo. Charlie Parker and Sor are not so far apart, really. Then he begins a similar line up an octave. Maybe it's the same line. Then we think we're going to get the same, in measure 23, we think that line's going to be the same as the line in measure 19, but up an octave. But instead, take a listen, there's a C sharp in there. Guess what? That's a C sharp diminished arpeggio, resolving to the 5, the root of the 5 chord, or what would be a 5 chord. So backing up a second, notice in measure 19, this is basically a G arpeggio. So, mi, do, mi, so, mi, do, so, mi, do. But with the passing tones. Mi, so, fa, mi, re, do. So it's a 4, 3, 9, 8. Then in measure 20, that is a D major arpeggio, the 5 chord, arpeggiated from the 3rd. 3, 5, root, jumping up the octave. This is like the line before. And here it changes to or probably better. We don't get the chord, we just get the single note D on the downbeat of measure 24. It's enough to tell us that the 5 is turning us back around, the dominant. So here's measure 23. Now, this is why Sor is probably the best composer for the guitar who, was a guitarist as his main instrument, right? He, the performer, composer type guy, he's the pinnacle, because he's not content to just repeat himself. He's always inventing. At the end of measure 24, we're getting a return to the same kind of thematic material that we saw at the beginning of the piece, except it's broken into these kind of staggered octaves. So in measures 24, end of 24 and 25 and 26, it's all G major, but he's doing octaves. Root, 5, piece, it sounded like this. 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now it's this. Root 5, 3, root 5, 3, root, and 26. Sol, mi, do, re, passing tone, mi, fa is a passing tone, sol, la, passing tone, ti, do. Now, again, we have a scale-wise line that ends up on this high E right before measure 29. And what is our harmony? We have F sharp half diminished, F sharp minor 7 flat 5. This is the diatonic chord built on the 7th scale degree of G. And it has a beautiful pull to the 1 chord in measure 30. That's all. Take a listen. G major arpeggio in measure 30. At the downbeat of measure 31, we have a little A minor type motion. If I put those together, which is the 2 of the key, in the final chord of measure 31, guess what? D7, but it's fifthless. So we've got the root, the flat 7, and the 3, but no 5th. And look at those upper voices. Right before the last chord of the piece, the upper voices are C and F sharp, tritone. And just like in the previous etude, it resolves in contrary motion to the 3rd and the root of the tonic. So we have one note resolving down, fa, mi, and then we have one resolving up, ti, do, together with the bass note. So maybe I'll play for you from pick up to 25 and a little under tempo. So I think this piece is one of the best ones in the series in Opus 44 for building various techniques, because it's got these scale runs, it's got different ways of presenting arpeggios, and it goes into 5th position a bit, which is, this is the first time we've seen that in this series of etudes. It's an excellent study. From a harmonic standpoint, I don't think we've seen too much new, but I would probably draw your attention to this idea of a circle of fourths motion, and looking out for these passages, like say I'll take from measure 11, although it really starts farther back. Measure 11, we have B7, resolving up to E minor, resolving up to A7, then resolving up to D major, and then resolving to sort of G major again, up a 4th, but that becomes, in measure 15, we talked about how that's a half diminished chord. So more use of the half diminished or the minor 7 flat 5 as a secondary function sometimes, and then sometimes just within the key, and also the idea of harmony moving along the circle of fifths, but counterclockwise, so it becomes a circle or cycle of fourths. I think those are some important points from this piece. Leave some comments, please subscribe, let me know what you think about the series. I would like to do a lot of these, but I want to see what the interest level is, so let me know. And I hope you enjoy your music making. Thank you.